You are listening to the new man beyond the macho jerk and the new age wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
You wish you could magically care less about the things that bother you? Why is it so hard to make real friends as we get older? And what keeps us from making a big change in life? Mark Manson has sold over 15 million copies of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Now, the book has been made into a documentary. Today, Mark and I sit down to discuss what makes him feel insecure, dealing with negative feedback, and what Will Smith taught him about fame. We only had a few minutes to talk, so we kicked things off, catching up about one of our favorite philosophers, Ken Wilber, and of course, we had to address the controversial comeback of the metal band Pantera. Hey, Mark.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man.
It's been a while. A friend of mine, Scott Barry Kaufman, landed Ken Wilber on his podcast and emailed me and was like, I don't know anything about this guy. What should I ask him? And I was like, dude, where do we start? I don't even know. I could write an essay of things to ask him. So, but anyway, I thought you would appreciate that.
All you have to do is just ask one question and then Ken will talk for 3 hours. So there's really not much he has to worry about.
That's true. That's a good point.
Well, I am curious. There's a big question I have. Like, how are you feeling about this Pantera comeback? I'm curious how folks are feeling about it.
I don't know. It doesn't feel right. You can't. I didn't realize it was actually happening. I heard that they were talking about it. But is it actually happening?
Yeah, they played a show last weekend with Charlie Benante and Zach Wilde. And so.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels money grabby, right? Like
it's a little tough. It's a little tough to watch. But
yeah.
Anyway,
if we should probably actually
it's fine. No, we don't have our typical time here. So let's jump in.
Yeah.
But I was curious about that. I was like, I wonder how you feel from Texas and metal. It's like that's sacred ground right there. So
yeah.
Seriously, congrats on this movie because I mean you mentioned Ken. We would sit in circles with Ken and trying to figure out how to make movies around his subject. It's hard. It's really hard. And you guys rocked it. You really did. It's not a lecture.
Thanks, dude.
It's a self-help book, for lack of a better term, turned into a film that is engaging the whole way out. Visually, it's beautiful. And yeah, I was amazed. I'm really hopeful. It's like, oh, wow, you guys are really pushing this medium. And I just was really, really excited. And so just like, I was skeptical when I saw about this coming because usually like, oh, this is going to be a 90-minute lecture. And it wasn't, man. You guys rocked it.
Thanks, dude. Yeah. I'm happy with how it turned out. And going into it, knowing nothing about filmmaking at all, going into it, I there was definitely some trepidation of like, what am I doing? Am I about to embarrass me? Am I about to face plant really hard in front of millions of people? But yeah, I think it turned out great.
Well, it is a huge leap. And that was one of the things that I wanted to touch on. And obviously the book is about what we choose to give a fuck about. And well, this is your baby. And you didn't have to do this. You didn't have to make a film about it. You didn't have to go in this direction. And nonetheless, I'm imagining it's incredibly vulnerable to now be releasing a movie where you're essentially the star. You're the only guy that's really on screen. You're the only guy that really has a voice in this thing. I'm like, okay, how does Mark Manson not give a fuck about this?
Oh, I definitely do. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a mind trip. It's funny because the hardest part about it was actually watching the various cuts, and the filming itself was a breeze. I mean, because I said the filming process, other than the swimming pool scenes, the filming process was basically just me sitting in a room talking, doing an interview like this for 6-7 hours straight for 3 days. And I've been doing interviews about subtle art for forever, for like 7 years. So that felt very much in my wheelhouse and was not a huge issue. the filming was fun. It was interesting. It was all new for me. Got to be on a film set, got to like have my makeup done. Like it, you know, it was, the whole thing was just wild. But yeah, then when the edits started coming out, and there were a couple of times I went to the office, the production office there in New Zealand, and they showed me different scenes and asked for my opinion and wanted feedback on structural things and stuff. That's when I was like, oh my God, I'm on fucking camera like the entire time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely brings to the surface a lot of, insecurities and self-doubt and stuff like that.
Well, I'm curious how that, because essentially the book is about that. The film is about that. And I'm wondering, okay, is this happening in real time? This thing's coming out. And I mean, with anything, you put anything out in the world and then it becomes this screen that everybody projects stuff onto. And yeah, I mean, how have you dealt with that over the years, especially with this book? It's very polarizing. What sticks for people? Are you surprised about what sticks for people and what sticks out for people? Like, wow, that's the thing you're going to latch onto. I've just been curious how those things land.
At this point, it's pretty clear what the book's greatest hits are. There's probably 5 or 6 sections of the book that consistently come up as people's favorites. What's interesting is that when there's negative feedback, when there's criticism, it's all over the map, and it's always something tiny. Like it starts as a very nitpicky thing. It's like a single phrase or sentence from one part of a obscure story in a chapter, and then people just start extrapolating conclusions out of that and start assuming that I'm, racist or fascist or communist or, like whatever ist that they hate the most, they decide that I must be that thing because of these like 3 words in this one sentence. And, so that's, but I will say, I think as an author, there's a certain amount of removal that you have from your audience. Like I don't actually get to see my readers, and my readers don't actually get to see me. There's like almost a layer of protection in that way. Whereas I feel like with a film, because it is visual, it does feel more intimate. And I've definitely noticed that I'll put it this way. It's funny, when I release a book, I'm definitely insecure about things, but I'm mostly insecure about ideas. It's like, is that really a good idea? Did I miss something? Is my logic not solid? Is the study that I referenced bullshit? Those are the sorts of things I worry about with a book. With this, it's a much more visceral kind of like school playground, I hope they like me type insecurity, which is, I'm not used to. I've not felt something like that in a long, long time. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been a really interesting experience.
Have there been any parallels with you get really personal. I think the movie's far more personal than the book was. And we get really into your pattern and the escapism or the hedonic treadmill, like all of that kind of thing. Is there any part of this that's like, am I still on it? Am I still, here I am in a movie and I'm at the center of all of this attention? Like, is there, I know you can totally mind fuck yourself in that, but how do you navigate that? Like okay, I know my shit and I know I've got a tendency to possibly go down these roads. Do you actively have to work with that, or what is that like for you?
It's interesting because I honestly think, I've actually been very, for 90% of this film's process, I was actually pretty lackadaisical about it. It's, despite what people would assume, the money in niche documentaries is not, it's not super exciting. So there's the financial side is not a big deal. It's a new medium that I've never participated in before, and I don't really have any ambitions. Like I'm not trying to be the next Dwayne Johnson or anything. So, I imagine I'm never going to do a film again. So there's not that aspect of like, oh, I hope this works so I get more opportunities. So through most of the process, I really, the reason I wanted to do it was just simply, there are a lot of people who don't read books that I think would benefit from these ideas. And that was kind of the long and short of it. And so that made things very simple through most of it. There was like very little ego or worrying about like, why am I in this project? I felt like I very much knew why I was in this project. I think now that we're actually getting closer to the release, it is bringing up a lot more emotions and also kind of a realization of like, oh shit, like this could actually be more impactful. Like, let's say it does turn out to be a big success. Like that actually can be very impactful on my day-to-day life in a way that, say, having a hit book is not. You're more recognizable. People's judgments of you are a little bit different. I mean, this is one thing that I remember talking to Will Smith about when I was working on his book. Is he told me, he's like, there are very different forms of fame. Like being music famous is a very different experience than being movie famous. And being movie famous is different than being like TV famous. Like people treat you differently. They look at you differently. They make different assumptions about you. So I'm kind of like, that's starting to come home a little bit with this just in the last couple of weeks. Maybe it ends up being a nothing burger in the story of my career, or maybe it ends up being very pivotal and changing everything. So I honestly, I could see it going either way. But it's been interesting to think about, I guess.
Yeah. A lot of the guys that I work with as a coach, they've achieved some level of quote success, whatever that means for their lives. You have obviously done that in spades, but there tends to come with it isolation. Things become a little more insular. And you talk a lot about the role of romantic relationships and that dynamic of, kind of doing the healing and that work that you did for yourself in the film. We didn't really talk about the trust of friendships and the other types of relationships. And so many guys that I talk to, it's really challenging to develop those relationships, develop trusting relationships with others. It tends to be more transactional or convenient, but a lot of guys are really alone. And I've noticed that even for myself, as I've gotten older, it's just a lot easier to just do family stuff. And, I keep in touch with guys long distance and that kind of thing. But man, really hungry for a sense of brotherhood. I think that is a huge desire for a lot of us, is to just have access to that sense of brotherhood. And I'm curious, is it just a pain in the ass to create these relationships, or do we just live with this isolation? I'm curious what your interpretation is of that.
Oh man. Well, there's a lot of layers to that. I think there's like a very macro layer, which is just kind of the fabric of society is altering quite a bit. Like we're becoming much more atomized. Like if you just think about every super convenient app on your phone is removing dozens and dozens of small human interactions that you would have every day. It's like just the fact that you can like order food from your phone is removing hundreds of small human interactions that you're having throughout the year. And I think we underestimate kind of the aggregation of all those things. Social media obviously has altered people's social lives a lot. We're living in a world now where people are we're more connected superficially, but we are more isolated physically than any time, I guess, in recent history, maybe ever. So I think, there's that layer to it. You also brought up the age thing. I think it's a pretty ubiquitous experience of people. I'm 38 now. I don't remember how old you are, but once you get into the 30s and 40s, it's finding friends, making friends, keeping friends. It becomes a lot more difficult than it was when you're in your teens and 20s. It's funny. I actually just tweeted a couple days ago. I said, the reason it's so hard to make new friends as an adult is because everybody that is worth knowing has something better to do. Which I've definitely found true in my life. And it's really hard. Like you have to really, I think part of it too is that by the time you get to your 30s and 40s, like you really start to know who you are, your values, what you care about. You've got your career going, you're focused on that. Maybe you've got, a wife, some kids, you're focused on them. and you don't really want to deviate. Like I don't know. It's like this part of life is about focus. It's about narrowing the time and energy that you're spending so that you can maximize what you're doing. And yeah, I think about it like I don't have time to just go dick around in a bar anymore. Like that's even if I wanted to, which I don't really want to, like I don't have time. Like it's just not a good use of my time anymore. Whereas, when I was 25, that's all I wanted to do. That is all I did. So yeah, I think there's an age component. I think you could argue there's potentially a gender component. I think men tend to, if you look at the data, statistically, women tend to be the social glue, the social fabric. I think men lean on their partners a lot to be the director of the social activities. And then just for me personally, coming back to the success piece, there was this great quote. Jason Calacanis was just on Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he said, the more successful you become, the smaller your world gets, which I thought was really profound. And I definitely relate to a lot. He said that people, when you're young and you're starting out, people have this naive belief that like, oh, if I can just make a bunch of money and kind of get known for some things, like everybody's going to want to hang out with me. I'm going to have friends everywhere. All the doors are going to be open to me. And he said, actually, what happens is the opposite kind of happens, because the more successful you become, the more fame you have, the more people judge you, they envy you, they maybe try to take advantage of you, manipulate you. And he said it's also, there's the higher you get, there's a smaller and smaller group of people that you relate to and relate to their experience. This is obviously something that is a very salient question in my own life, something I think about quite a bit. And I definitely crave strong friendships and community a lot. Like it's something that I am kind of always on the lookout for in my own life, because I think at this age and in what I'm doing, this career path, like it's hard. It's scarce. Like I'm not working in a big office with 200 people. Like I've got to be on the lookout for it.
I think it's great to hear that perspective, because that myth is alive and well. If only, right? If only I was at this stature, if only I was at this place, look at all the people I'd have access to, look at all the people that would be approaching me for XYZ. And I found it to be the opposite. I coached a guy that was a billionaire, self-made billionaire. And he was like, the only people I interact with are people I can fire. And it was sad. It was really sad just how really lonely he was, and how he really couldn't trust anybody because everybody was kissing his ass in a sense. And so, I think it's important because it's such a nourishing part of our lives, and yet it's also really challenging to create there. Yeah. Next thing I wanted to ask you about was redefining ourselves. And a lot of the guys that I work with are trying to redefine themselves. They reach okay, I've done well. I got to this point. What's the next thing? I'm scared to move on to the next thing. I give a fuck about my money and my lifestyle and my status. And you talk about identity so much in the book and in the and in the film. And I'm curious what your take is on it, why we resist redefining ourselves, why we would resist moving it in that next phase of life.
I think there's a couple reasons. One, the primary one is just simply the uncertainty or the insecurity. It's even if you don't particularly like who you are, it's comfortable. You know what your day looks like. You know what your relationships look like. Whereas even if the person you want to become is in your mind a better person, you don't know what that person's life is like. You don't know what their relationships are like. You don't know the challenges that they deal with or the sacrifices they have to make. And so there's just, I think, an inherent fear with any sort of identity change. Anything that threatens your identity is just, I think our psychology's natural response is fear, good or bad. I think another aspect of it is I think when most people think about changing themselves or changing their identity, it's very easy and it's very exciting and fun to think about the benefits of that identity change. you think about like, oh, that how amazing that new career is going to be, or if I move to this new city and live in this new house, like how everything's going to be perfect and amazing. It's you can really occupy yourself for many hours just kind of dreaming and fantasizing about those things. But it's not fun or exciting to think about the sacrifices of that change, the stress and the frustration and the uncertainty of trying to become a different person, trying new habits and behaviors, trying to live in a new place, trying to form a new community. But the thing is like, it's the sacrifices that actually make it happen. So yeah, I just think there's a natural bias to think about the results, and the results make you feel good, but they don't actually get anything done. You have to think about, what are you willing to give up for something?
You go into that quite well and quite in depth in the film. I think you even said change is fucking brutal, I think is the key.
Yeah, it is. Oh, it is.
Right on, my man. Well, I just want to bring up, I think your friend Jimmy was a psychopath. I don't think he was just an entitled douchebag. I think he checked a lot of psychopath boxes, man.
Maybe he was. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm hoping somebody writes a book like how to spot psychopaths and malignant narcissists, because I think our world would be a lot better off if we could spot them early on. And it's like, oh, this guy's just, he's not just a dickhead. He's really not well. So
it's funny. So one of the interviews I did yesterday, they asked me, has Jimmy ever reached out? First of all, I don't think Jimmy knows that if he's read my book, I don't think he knows that he's Jimmy. But it was funny because when we were making the film, Nathan, the director, he wanted to know. He's like, can you show me Jimmy? Like, can you show me his Facebook profile and show me some pictures? He's like, I want to get a good sense. Like, how are we going to represent this guy? So I had not thought about Jimmy in 10 years, 8 years, something like that. And sure enough, I went on Facebook. I'm not friends with him anymore on Facebook, but I dug up his profile, found his social media accounts and stuff and looked on it. And sure enough, guess what he's doing? It's, picture of him standing next to a private jet saying like, our platinum silver circle, it only has 3 spots left, like sign up today. And I was just like, yeah, dude is still hustling.
Still doing it.
Still doing it. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, again, congrats on the film. Congrats on all the success. Is it too far? You got anything on the burner? What's cooking up next for you?
I've got another book in the works. Although I think it's still probably a couple of years away. Still early days, too early to really talk about it much, but working on a new book. I'm investing a lot, actually. Starting next year, I'm going to be doing a lot more YouTube content, video content online, and really kind of just getting back to my bread and butter. I did the last few years, I've done a bunch of fun kind of different projects. I did an audio book for Audible. I did the Will Smith book, and then I've done this film, and it's been fun, but I'm feeling this urge to kind of get back to my roots, which is just online audience, nurture the online audience, write a book, and kind of enter the next phase of my career, I guess.
Right on, man. Thank you so much, buddy. I look forward to sharing this with everybody and talking to you again soon.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.